couple more minutes. I see more people joining. That's fantastic. Great to have you all here. We're going to give everybody maybe another minute or two to just let everyone have a chance to join, and then we'll get started. All right. Hopefully people have made it in, and if more people are coming, that'd be fantastic. But we are going to get things started here. So thank you all for coming. This is the Proposition 1, Cycle 5, Potential Applicant Workshop or Orientation. And let's see. Yeah, James, next slide. We'll get this thing rolling. So for the agenda, we're going to go through some quick introductions and welcomes in just a moment. But we're also then going to hit these sort of major points. An overview of the Cycle 5 timeline, kind of give you an idea of what the process looks like. Some major components of the application. What are the major sort of building blocks of this thing? How are those major building blocks reviewed and scored on our end? And then we're going to run through a list of some helpful tips and tricks that will hopefully smooth your application process along. And then we'll take some questions, and we're going to have plenty of time at the end for questions. Now, a note on questions. If something comes up in the midst of things and it's confusing, by all means, unmute, raise a hand, drop a note in the chat, and let us know. And we can talk about things as we go along. If it becomes a kind of longer discussion, we may push that to the end, just so we can all get through sort of this core material, and then have plenty of time at the end for lots of questions and answers and discussions and all sorts of stuff. And then when we run out of questions, we'll be done. So with that, James, next slide. So I really want to just welcome everybody to this workshop. This is sort of the beginning of the 5th and final solicitation cycle for Proposition 1, at least for the Delta Conservancy's Proposition 1 grant program. And we're really excited to be launching this 5th cycle. The first 4 have been amazing. And yeah, we're looking forward to launching cycle 5. To give you just quick introductions, my name is Aaron Heyman. I've been the environmental scientist at the Delta Conservancy for a while, and been sort of the Proposition 1 lead for about 1.5 years or 2 years now. And with me, my co-presenter is Shelley Temple-King. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Certainly. Thanks, Aaron. I'm Shelley Temple-King. I am the other environmental scientist at the Delta Conservancy. And I've been with the Conservancy for a little over 1 year.
Awesome. All right. So yeah, next slide. All right, so to go over the cycle 5 timeline, it's kind of broken up into these large chunks, basically 4 really big chunks for the purposes that we're going to be dealing with today. And those are the concept proposal submission period, which we are in right now and extends until August 31st. Then after the end of August comes the concept proposal review period, which is where we, so the Delta Conservancy staff, review the concept proposals and then get back to you. And that'll run September 1st to October 25th. The full proposal submission period comes next, between October 26th and ending December 15th, which then kicks off the full proposal review period, which goes from December 16th on until spring of 2022, when awards are made at one of the spring board meetings. So it's kind of laid out graphically here at the bottom of the slide. And to give a little bit more detail on exactly what happens in each of those phases, next slide, please. So the concept proposal submission period, like I said, what we're in right now, this is when you are kind of developing the ideas of your projects. What projects your projects are generally going to look like? What are the major ideas? What are the sort of sketched out budget? And then you submit those materials. There are all the application materials on our website. So you can go and fill those tables and fill out that information. Concept proposals are designed to be sort of more short Cliff Notes version of what a project might look like. So the materials are all kind of short by design. After those are submitted, we take them and begin reviewing them. And that's the concept proposal review period, number 2 on the slide. And this is when we review the materials that you've submitted, kind of figure out what we think of as the strengths and weaknesses, and then meet with you to discuss those strengths and weaknesses and give you as much feedback as we possibly can. So that when we move to number 3, the full proposal submission period, you have the most information possible to make the best decision that you possibly can on whether or not you're going to pursue a full proposal. And I should clarify here, there's no scoring threshold that you have to get above with a concept proposal to be eligible for a full proposal. There's no invitation that we send out. The decision to come in for a full proposal is really up to you. Like I said, we'll give you as much of the background as we possibly can, as much sort of advice as we can, but then the decision is up to you. If you decide to apply for the full proposal, that begins the communication blackout period. So before that full proposal submission period opens, Shelley and I are available. You can email us questions. We can sort of have a dialogue. After that point, at the point that number 3 begins, is really when all communications on our part have to end to maintain the competitive process of Proposition 1 and just ensure fairness. So please, by all means, ask your questions early. After the full proposal submission has ended on December 15th, we then take those full proposals, all the materials that you submitted, and we begin our review process. And those proposals are all reviewed, they're scored. We consult with external experts to get their input on the proposals. And then we develop recommendations for our board, which takes us to number 5, awards. When we bring those recommendations and present them to the board, and the Delta Conservancy board then votes and makes decisions on how to proceed for each project individually. And like I said, that's going to happen in spring of 2022. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shelley, the next section.
Great, thanks, Aaron. So the first really large part of the application process is just making sure that you're eligible to apply for a Proposition 1 grant from us. And so there are 3 main kind of buckets that we check as we're determining eligibility. The first is just California bond law. So California bond law and Proposition 1 have a requirement that any Proposition 1 funded project must result in a capital outlay. So this is something like a purchase of land and or construction. And so this is especially important to consider if you're proposing a planning project, because the resulting capital outlay, that construction project, must be clearly connected to the planning project that you're proposing. In terms of geography, we are the Delta Conservancy. We primarily fund projects within the legal Delta and the Sassoon Marsh. If you propose a project that is outside of the legal Delta, you may still be eligible, but the proposal will need to include some additional information, such as the alignment with the ecosystem goals of the Delta plan and also benefits of the project to the Delta. In terms of entities and organizations, there are several types of entities who can apply for Proposition 1 funding. And for each of these listed, for public agencies, nonprofits, tribal organizations, public utilities, and municipal water companies, there are specific additional requirements depending on the type of entity, and those are outlined in detail in the full proposal application. Next slide, James. So the first step in the application process is the concept proposal. And as Aaron mentioned, this is sort of an abbreviated proposal. It's not meant to be as in-depth as the full proposal. So the proposal is a fillable Microsoft Word form with an included cover page, as well as an Excel budget table and a fillable performance measures table, which needs to be used where applicable, which is in pilot and implementation projects. The proposal should be submitted as a PDF document. You may combine all of the files except the budget tables, because those must be submitted as an Excel file. In the proposal, you'll be asked to enter some basic project and applicant information, as well as a more detailed project description, management plan, readiness assessment, scientific merit, and then also how you are going to monitor and assess project success. In terms of the map of your project site, it should be sufficiently detailed so that reviewers are able to orient themselves to the location of the project with respect to the delta. Additionally, the map should provide enough information that reviewers can gauge the general project boundaries. And in considering the map submission, we do want to mention that the Conservancy has a commitment to access and inclusion. So we request that as applicants, you provide maps that are as accessible as possible. If when you are preparing your map, you need some pointers and best practices, we have those available and are happy to meet with you and share. The budget workbook for the concept proposal is very similar to the workbook from Cycle 4 for any Cycle 4 applicants. But as a heads up, the full proposal budget workbook is not, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But the budget table for the concept proposal is pretty basic. It's just a very broad brush of about how much money you think you're going to be asking for. And then in the performance measures table, each project objective needs to be listed. And then the associated outputs, that's what you'll do during the funding term, and the outcomes, which are the likely habitat ecosystem impacts that will result from the project over time, as well as metrics for both outputs and outcomes. Next slide, please, James. So that pretty much does it for the concept proposal. It is pretty minimal. The full proposal has several more components. So the first being the proposal itself. And so the full proposal application is also a fillable Word document. It should also be submitted as a PDF after completing it. And again, any of the attachments described on the following slide can be combined into this full proposal, except for the budget. Responses for the full proposal are in the form of text boxes, checkboxes, and pull-down menus. So you'll be asked to enter detailed project information. And then, depending on the very specific conditions of your project, so your organization type, the type of project, where you're located or where the project is located, you'll be asked to answer various sections of the application, and each section has a lead-in to let you know if that's a section that you need to answer as an applicant. Some sections also require the submission of additional documentation, such as a current negotiated indirect cost agreement, permitting status, CEQA status. So all of those are going to require additional documentation. So just pay close attention to the requirements of each section. Acquisitions projects also require substantially more documentation and have specific sections that must be completed as well. And basically in this proposal, you'll be asked to expand on the narratives that you supplied in the concept proposal and then provide in-depth documentation to support them. The budget section consists of a narrative, an attached budget workbook, which we'll touch on the next slide, and cost share commitment letters if you're proposing cost share. The list here of appendices, I do need to make one slight modification to it. The status of applicable environmental permits, CEQA documents, and covered action processes will be found in the application as inline tables with the corresponding section narrative and not as appendices. But the schedule and list of deliverables is an appendix, as is the financial management systems questionnaire. When populating your schedule and list of deliverables, carefully consider the timing of the due dates for your deliverables and make sure you build in allowances for unexpected issues that may arise during the 3-year funding term. For the financial management systems questionnaire, you'll need to populate the table with financial and organization information and attach all of the requested supporting documentation. And just as a heads up, there are 7 requested documents to support your financial management systems questionnaire. This form needs to be signed, and we suggest the applicant sign it using DocuSign or Adobe Sign. And just to highlight, uncertainty about financial management systems is something that can definitely delay grant execution. So take special care when you're preparing this to make sure that it is very thorough, even though it is not necessarily about the project that you're proposing. It's something that we have to carefully consider. Next slide, please. And then for additional documentation. So as I said before, all of these attachments can be combined with the proposal document with the exception of the budget tables. Oh, and the applicant checklist, which is actually not listed here. So the first attachment is the applicant checklist. The second is the budget tables. As I mentioned on the concept proposal slide, the budget workbook has been updated. So if you're a current grantee, you'll notice that the budget workbook bears a very strong resemblance to our latest quarterly invoice reporting template. And so we've aligned the budget tables with the invoice template in an effort to make both the budget creation and reporting a little bit more streamlined. A note is that macros must be enabled in Microsoft Excel in order to add any rows to this budget table. And there are notes about that in several other places as well, but just so it's on everybody's mind. Attachment, the next attachment is the cost allocation plan. And again, uncertainty about how costs are allocated is something that can also delay grant agreement execution. So please take special care with that as well. The California Conservation Corps consultation is listed here being applicable for pilot and implementation projects. The consultation process has changed since the last Delta Conservancy Proposition 1 grant solicitation. And one sort of major change to note about their consultation policy is that they have determined that projects that do not include any hand labor component are exempt from the consultation process. And so if your project does not include any hand labor component, you don't need to complete the core consultation. The performance measures table, this is identical to the table that is found in the concept proposal. But please ensure that the table you submit with your full proposal incorporates any feedback that you received from the concept proposal. And then last is the acquisition table, and that is for acquisitions projects only. If you are proposing an acquisitions project, we'll definitely want to work together during the concept proposal stage to make sure that all of the requirements are understood. And I believe with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Erin. And the next slide.
Erin, you're muted.
Thanks, Shelley. So now you have a sense of, those big chunks, the big major components of our concept proposal and full application processes. I wanted to go over some of those big chunks and how they're reviewed and scored. So in particular, we focus on these 10 major bullet points. And of course, all 10 of these have additional supporting information that contributes to them. But as far as like big overarching ideas, there are big 10 are these: the project description, which is really, what is the project? Why is it important? How does it fit in the landscape? What benefit does it give to the ecosystem? What benefit does it give to specific species? What is the project? What are the goals and objectives of the project? The project team is who is going to be directly involved in the execution of this project. What expertise do they have? Why are they the people who are going to help to give this project the greatest chance of success? The budget, pretty straightforward, is what's it all going to cost? What kinds of things are Prop 1 money going to need to be spent on in order to get this project going? And as Shelley mentioned, our budget tables, there are lots of cost categories, lots of sort of bits and pieces. So please be careful and really thoroughly and accurately fill out your budget tables, including justifying why the costs that you're putting there are fair and reasonable. The next two, cost share and cost leveraging, are related. Cost share is a number for the amount of money that other organizations or other sources are contributing to your project, to get your project going and up and running. In particular, cost share are non-state funding sources. So this could be federal, this could be from a nonprofit, this could be from a state or county. Any source of funding that can be either in cash or in kind that comes from a non-state source. And cost leveraging is exactly the same concept, just from state sources. So again, could be cash, could be in kind, could be from any number of state agencies, but from a state source. That's the cost leveraging category. The next one, alignment with state priorities, is a chance for you to explain how your project fits into the larger picture of the state of California and the major priorities and major plans that have been proposed for restoration and for work in California. So these can include things like the Delta Plan or the California Water Action Plan or Proposition 1 itself. Other useful things to reference are things like the Delta Conservancy's mission or enabling legislation or strategic plan. This is all by way of explaining why your project kind of fits into the bigger strategy of what will hopefully be effective habitat restoration or water quality improvement or sustainable agriculture related to water. Long-term viability has to do with how your project and the benefits from that project are going to be maintained beyond the end of the funding term. So our grants come with a standard 3-year funding term. But after those 3 years are done, and after the money from our awards stop, what mechanisms are in place to ensure that the investment that you put and the Delta Conservancy put into the project maintains for a minimum of 15 years? This is a capital outlay project. Readiness has to do with how quickly you will be able to begin your project once an award is made or once a grant agreement is executed. So some projects are very far down the planning process, are really developed very well and could get started virtually right away. However, oftentimes that's not the case, which is fine. It is not a terminal issue. But we do need to know, is it going to be, how much time is it going to be between an award or grant execution and when you could start actually implementing the project? And what are the major steps that still need to be accomplished between now and then? Local support has to do, again, kind of with how your project fits into the landscape, but much more sort of the local neighborhood. Who around your project knows about it and wants your project to occur? This can be from a huge diversity of sources. And in fact, the wider range of support sources that you can demonstrate, probably the better. And these sources can include federal agencies, state agencies, municipalities, counties, community groups, special districts, nonprofits, really any organization, neighboring landowners, any individuals or organizations that might be impacted by the project, might benefit from the project, might be in the area of the project, and who are willing to put down on a piece of paper, write a letter saying they want the project to go forward as well. And finally, scientific merit and performance measures. So scientific merit really has to do with what is the underlying scientific ideas that are supporting your project? What is the use of the best available science, and how is that best available science informing the decisions and the design and the creation, the concept of your proposal? Also, how is your project going to be resilient to climate change? And how is your project maybe going to benefit and help to reduce the impacts of climate change? Also, how is adaptive management going to be incorporated into your project to respond to the almost inevitable surprises that come when putting these often large and complicated projects on the ground for many years? And performance measures are really a measure of how you know you got there. They're benchmarks. They're benchmarks that you can pick to measure your success by, and to know that your project has been as successful as the proposal claimed that it would be. So with those 10 criteria in mind, and these are all what we and external reviewers score as when developing our recommendations, I'm going to hand it back to Shelley, and next slide, for some helpful tips on how to get there.
Thanks, Aaron. So these tips we put together just based on some issues we've seen applicants have in the past, and also just with an eye on being proactive. So the first is to explain and to separate the planning activities and the implementation project that planning will lead to. And so this really harkens back to the California bond law, and that any planning has to lead to an on-the-ground capital outlay project. And so just really make sure that you're being very, very clear about how whatever planning you're proposing is going to result in a capital outlay project. Please provide your federal negotiated indirect cost rate agreement. As with some of the other financial attachments and documentation, issues with the indirect cost rate agreement can definitely delay the execution of a grant. And so we'd rather just have all of that information at the outset, so that when and if the projects are approved by the board, the grant execution process is a little faster. If your project sort of sits within a larger framework or a larger planning effort, make sure you link how the project that you're proposing fits in with that larger framework or the larger planning effort. So yeah, don't let it just sit as an island without sort of making the connections to the landscape as a whole. And talk to us frequently, except during the full proposal submission and review periods when you can't talk to us. But talk to us frequently in advance of the full proposal submission. Oh, James, next slide. I just tried to advance the slide myself. And so again, address each application prompt very fully, even if it feels like some material may be repeated in separate sections. When we send applications out for external expert review, not every reviewer receives the entire application. So make sure that in each section, the application prompt has been addressed to the point that someone who maybe hadn't seen the rest of the application would understand your answers. Consult with the Delta Stewardship Council staff early to determine your proposal's consistency with the Delta plan. And we want to highlight that this is all projects. So implementation projects, planning projects, acquisitions, pilot projects, everybody. And then also, when you're developing your performance measures, make sure they're both appropriate and attainable. And this applies to pilot and implementation projects. And make sure that you very clearly explain both the outputs and the outcomes, keeping in mind that outputs are the results that you as a grantee have control over, and that will that will happen during your grant funding term. And that outcomes you may not have as much control over. There could be other circumstances that that play into the outcomes, but it's the sort of habitat outcomes that you reasonably believe that you would see from the work that you're doing. And as Erin mentioned before, explain why the costs that you're proposing in the budget table are fair and reasonable. And so in the full proposal budget table, on each tab of the budget workbook, there is a cell that is set aside for the applicant to explain why each cost is fair and reasonable. So for example, if you are going to buy binoculars, let us know how we know that you're spending an appropriate amount of money for the quality of binocular that you need. And that just really, it expedites the process for us to ensure that we are adequately stewarding state funds. And so again, it's with so many of the budget documentation and financial documentation, that's something else that can really delay grant agreement execution. And so we'd like to make sure that we have a full understanding from the outset. Next slide.
So here's some additional resources, some websites and links for where to submit the concept proposals, where to learn about the Delta plan, where to learn about more of our Proposition 1 program. So just some more background information to fill the picture. And next slide. And with that, any questions? And actually, next slide as well. For contacts, here is the general Proposition 1 email address and also Shelley's email address, so that you can reach out to either or both with any information or any questions that you might have. So with that, I want to open it up. Feel free to unmute yourself, which I think everyone can do, or request to be unmuted if that's how it looks. Or put something in the chat and let us know if you have any questions.
Just a reminder, all participants do have the ability to unmute themselves if they want to. If they should be able to raise their hands if they'd like to go that route too, to be called upon, but
I had a quick question. Is
Yeah, go ahead.
Concept proposal submission mandatory?
Concept proposals are mandatory. Yeah, full proposals are only accepted from people from organizations who submitted for projects that were a concept proposal was submitted for. Yes.
Great, thank you.
I'm seeing over in the chat a couple of questions. Let's see. Are you going to prioritize implementation projects over planning projects because this is the last round of Proposition 1 funding? It's really hard to say. It really depends on what projects are proposed. I don't think there's any inherent prioritization that's going to go on. And there's another question: how much money remains available, and is there a funding limit for any one project? As far as a funding limit goes, no limit. The pot at this point looks like it's going to be just a little bit over $3 million. Another question came in. Excellent question about cost share. Do projects with cost share score higher? Yes. Cost share and cost leveraging are both worth points. So the more cost share you can bring, the better off you will be. And Kelly, I will just get you in just 1 second. One more question from the chat first, though. Is there a number of projects you are hoping to fund? No, it really depends on who comes in, who asks for funding, how much they ask for, and how the board decides to sort of divvy up the available funds. The board has the discretion to partially fund projects. So if there are, $7-8 million grants that all come in as requests, they may decide to fund small amounts of a few of them and not fund all of any of them. Kelly, you had a question.
Thanks. I was typing out my question and it was taking a long time, so I just felt like I should voice it. When we after we submit the concept proposal, will we be getting detailed feedback on things like whether the Delta Conservancy might even not consider our concept proposal as a full proposal, or like what is the format of the review and feedback from the Delta Conservancy between the concept and full proposals?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we would definitely look at eligibility, and if there's a major red flag that says, oh, this is just not the kind of thing that Proposition 1 can fund, we would definitely give you that feedback. The feedback, as far as the general format is really sort of a high-level overview of where we think sort of the strengths and weaknesses of your project are, and kind of maybe a few of the big steps that you could take, or the major steps that you could take to make yourself as competitive as possible when transitioning your proposal from a concept proposal and making that decision to go into the full proposal.
Okay, thank you.
Definitely. Another question from the chat came in. Do you think there's a chance the Conservancy could only fund one $3 million project? Or do you think they are more likely to fund several projects that are less? That's a really good question, and I'm afraid that would basically involve reading the minds of our board members. I'm not really sure how they would play that. I think it would depend really on how many projects came in that scored over the threshold. For full proposals, while concept proposals don't have any kind of scoring, full proposals do have a 75-point threshold, 75 out of 100, to reach the even bare minimum requirement to be recommended for funding. So if only one project or two projects score above that threshold, that might really change the board's decision versus if they had like 5 or 10 projects that all scored above that threshold. It's too complicated, too many variables, I think, to really make a prediction on that one. And you're very welcome for the sort of semi non-answer that was. So another question came in. Are board members, let me scroll up to it, are board members the main reviewers, or will other staff and partners review applications? Board members don't review, as in like review and score the proposals at all. Staff reviews and scores it, and we do consult with external experts from a variety of different agencies and organizations who also review and score at least some components of the applications. The board members are the final deciders on who gets funding, how much funding, who gets denied, that kind of thing. Another question came in the chat. Will you be able to share how many concept proposals you received for cycle 5? I'm just trying to remember the exact process for this. I believe that the list of concept proposals are posted on our website. So yes, that should be available. Since we have this block of time at the end here, if people have more general questions, by all means, keep them coming. But if anyone has specific questions about their project, we can also discuss those.
Hey, Aaron, this is Campbell.
Hey, Campbell.
So I just thought I'd jump in. It looks like questions are slowing down a little bit. I want to apologize to everybody. My intention was to be here at the beginning to say hello and welcome everyone, but my fault. I joined late and didn't have the right access criteria. So I'll just take this minute to say, we really appreciate your willingness and interest in our Proposition 1 grant program, and we hope that you will apply, bring great projects to us. And as Aaron and Shelley have both mentioned, we are pretty open and can interact with you right up into the submittal of the full proposal. So do take advantage of that and let us help you navigate the process. And again, we look forward to working with you and hope that we can fund some great projects. So thank you all.
Thanks, Campbell. We did get another question that came in. If a project includes a regulatory compliance component, but is not solely a regulatory project, would it be eligible for this grant? Hard to say. It would depend on, is that regulatory compliance involving mitigation of any kind? Because mitigation is definitely not an eligible expense at all. Like no mitigation projects can be funded by Prop 1 at all. But is there other regulatory compliance components that you might have in mind? Maybe. And it would depend on what else the project is and what sort of overall proportion of the project it represents, and some other sort of more nuanced factors. But it really depend on what that regulatory compliance component looks like. All right, well, I mean, the contacts are up there on the screen right now. Feel free to use them. As Campbell said, by all means, reach out to us and with questions. And yeah, be in touch. And thank you very much, everyone, for attending the workshop. I hope it was valuable, and I hope you bring us amazing proposals, and I look forward to seeing kind of how Cycle 5 plays out. So with that, thank you. Remember, there is going to be a second workshop in August, so you've got another chance at this material and to come and ask us questions again. And with that, I think pretty much adjourn the meeting and have a wonderful day.